very pleased to have got these for very little at the charity shop recently. They were all marked down to 50p, and I've got quite a few of these. I'm going to wind them up into some balls so they take up a bit less space than they do here, and I've got to figure out what I'm going to make with them. By the time you watch this video you'll know, but right now I don't know. I've got 3 of these gold ones. I've got, sadly, just the one pink, and then the rest of these, there's another 9 in this black and silver. They're all the same kind of yarn, so I'm happy that they're all going to knit up or crochet up the same. I just need to figure out what I'm going to do for what bits to make sense of it so it looks deliberate when I make it. One thing I want to do is make use of that pink and the gold. Because I'd got the least amount of that, they were going to be harder to put into another project. So I used that as my basis and then worked out the pattern I wanted to build and added in the silver, even though I'd got the most amount of silver, until I got a pattern I was happy enough with the materials that I'd got. And this is what I ended up with. 48 squares in total, and this gave me a plan to work from when I was sewing everything together so that I can understand where everything went. After that, we get our knitting needles and we start casting on. I'm using 7.5 millimeter needles, UK size. That's going to be different for different countries. And to begin with, just make a little knot, put that on my finger so I find that easier to slide onto the needle to begin. I leave myself a fairly long tail if I can with this, because that's going to come in handy later. I then cast on 10 stitches. I'm using just a basic stockinette stitch for this, so you knit a row and then purl a row. So once we've got our 10 stitches cast on, this was the point where I started learning that this wool wasn't the nicest to work with. And yeah, I'm going to use the term wool and yarn interchangeably. When I learned knitting, all yarn was called wool, regardless of what it was made of. These days, of course, people tend to say yarn instead. So once you've got your 10 stitches on, we then start with a knit row. I'm not going to go over how you knit and how you purl. There's lots of videos out there on that. I'm not the place for that. And just persist with it, really. The challenge with this is it's almost like knitting with ribbon, because the way this particular yarn is done, it's like there's 2 lines with little squares joined together, so it's like a woven strip rather than a twisted fibre like you have with a regular wool. It does mean it's very easy to get the needle through the wrong part. It's also very hard to count how many stitches you've got, and once you've made a section, it's almost impossible to count how many rows you've done. Of all the yarns I've used over the years, this is one of the most frustrating, and I'm counting those fluffy baby yarns in with that, which are squeaky and tend to get too tight as you knit. Yeah, this one was a bit of a challenge. Really not that much fun. With the knit row complete, turn your needles round and then do a purl row. I actually find purl rows easier than knit rows for some reason. Not everybody's the same with their knitting, and I had to hold the needles a bit funny for doing the recording here so that you can kind of see what I'm doing. Knitting's very, very hard to actually record. As I go along, I keep a piece of paper so I can mark down which row I'm on. That means if I have to put this down at any point for any reason, I know exactly where I am. I don't need to try and count back through this to figure that out. That really, really helped a lot, because it's such a frustrating material to use, this one, that quite often I just had to put it down so that I didn't lose my temper with it. Happily, we got through it all, and that little checklist really helped. Once I've got my row of 10, well, once I've got my block of 10 rows, I'll then look at casting off. And again, this was kind of annoying, because when I started the square, my tension was a lot looser than when I finished the square. Not really sure why. That's not a problem I've had with other yarns, but this one really hard to keep the tension even throughout the whole project. And it seemed to be almost impossible to block them out square as well when I was done. I think it's just the nature of the material, because it's a fully synthetic material, so it's very, very difficult to get it to behave properly. I mean, when I first started the project I was going to crochet it. That very quickly proved to be impossible. So once we've cast off, leave a moderately long tail, just go back through that final loop to secure everything, and that will help later when we sew everything together to make the patchwork that we're building here. It didn't work. It's huge. And what's really confusing about this is I put this on the mannequin, and I wanted to check when I put it on the mannequin that it was going to be what I wanted. The trouble with knitting is it takes a very long time to make your fabric, and you can't just cut it to whatever shape you want without it all coming unravelled, at least when it's this kind of knitting. So you take the precautions that you can, and then sometimes the nature of the wool means that the end garment is not what you want, and for me, this is not what I want. The back is just as bad. When I mocked this up on the mannequin, this neckline wasn't down here, it was actually here. And at the back, the neckline was actually up at the collar, pretty much. It also wasn't this wide. I am struggling to keep this on my shoulders at the moment. Yeah. Now I do like how it looks. The patchwork effect is fantastic. I think it looks great. But I hate how it feels. It is scratchy and horrible, and I don't want it anywhere near my skin. Yeah, that's not nice. So what do you do when this has happened? Well, the nice thing about knitting is you can just salvage all of this. Yes, it was a lot of work to put this together, but I don't think making it as a patchwork garment like this is going to work. The nature of the yarn, it's too heavy, it stretches out too easily, and yes, it's slouchy, but it's too slouchy. I don't have the relevant skill and experience to actually figure out how to pattern this properly to make what I want. And I definitely don't have the motivation, because this stuff is awful to knit with. Absolutely horrible. So I'm going to recycle this. I'm going to unpick it all and I'm going to put it into something else, and I might bring that back in the future. The trouble with knitting videos is they take an incredibly long time to make, and you get very little footage at the end of it. So this short little video, I've been knitting this for weeks, and it just hasn't worked. It just hasn't worked. Let's show you what I've been doing with the leftover yarn and where some of this is going to go though, because I have had some success with an alternative project, which I'm quite happy about. I'm a little bit tight on space at the moment, so you'll have to excuse the layout a little bit. I'll be honest, this video is a teeny bit rushed because of how it's ended up. But this is my alternative approach, and by using a different yarn with this metallic, it becomes a lot nicer against the skin, and I like this a lot more. It's a lot easier to work with, it's a lot easier to knit. So far I've got the two front panels and I've got the rear panel of this garment done, which is this. And yeah, the pattern itself is another story, but effectively it's a 1950s Emu brand pattern of some description for sort of a cardigan type thing. I've started work on the sleeves, and this yarn, which is machine knitting wool basically, so it's a bit lighter weight. It's not as thick as your usual double knitting, but it's good for mixing with another yarn like this. This I got from the charity shop for £3. Because I know what this sparkly yarn's like against the skin, anywhere that this garment touches my skin, I don't want the sparkly yarn. So the cuffs on the sleeves, which is what I've started here, and the shawl collar will just be in the pink, because this is just an acrylic
but it's really nice and soft. So that will feel nice against my skin. Because of the type of rib that you're doing, it will hold its structure fine. So that will be good enough for what I want. And yeah, it just, when you've blended it with another yarn, it's a lot more stable. It holds its shape a lot better. And this is done, although the pattern calls it wheat ear stitch, I'm told this is a brioche or fisherman's rib. So it's quite a bouncy knit when it's done. None of this is blocked, and when it's finished, I don't know, maybe I'll stick it on my Patreon or something. It's going to be a while because it's knitting. But yeah, this project's going a lot nicer, and that's what you do, is when a project goes wrong, you see if you can salvage it and turn it into a different project.